My mom refused to bring my son to the hospital while I was out on a business trip because she had brunch scheduled with my golden child sister and told me to handle my burden on my own, so I did as she asked, and now she's sending gifts worth $10,000 for my son. But this was the final straw for me. Can you imagine your own mother putting your child's life in danger? Not once, but twice. What do you do when the person who gave you life becomes a genuine threat to the precious life you're trying to protect? My family has always been complicated, but nothing prepared me for the day I had to choose between my son's safety and my mother's place in our lives. For as long as I can remember, my relationship with my mom, Sylvia, has been rocky, to say the least. After my dad passed away unexpectedly when I was just a kid, she raised my youngest sister, Jane, and me all alone. She became this incredibly bitter woman, and while everyone around us just shrugged it off, excusing her because of the trauma she'd faced, I was the one who felt the brunt of it. I was a spirited child, always running around outside, smiling at strangers, but that kindness never seemed to reach my mother. Jane was only 2 when Dad died, so I stepped up, trying to help Mom in my own little ways, taking care of Jane, keeping her entertained. My mom would acknowledge my efforts here and there, but that was pretty much all the love I got. Over time, I started acting out. I became the ungrateful child she probably expected me to be. By the time I was 13, I was working part-time, doing chores, even babysitting Jane. But no matter how much I did, Mom would come home from work and find fault with the tiniest things. It led to fights almost every single day. So, I just shut down. I became aloof. I think Jane felt that shift, and she tried to get closer to me, but I pushed her away. Over the next few years, it became painfully clear that Jane was Mom's favorite. The favoritism was so blatant. Mom even skipped my high school graduation because Jane was sick. That's a story for another day, but it just cemented the distance between us. As soon as I could, I moved to another city for college. There was no contact with Mom because neither of us bothered to reach out. Jane and I still exchange casual texts. But that was it. A few years into college, I'm married, and then my beautiful son, Jaden, arrived. He was born with severe, life-threatening allergies to 10 specific food items. Our doctor recommended a strict vegan lifestyle, and we embraced it. Everything was stable. Jane and I were still in touch, mostly through texts and the occasional call. But Mom, she heard about Jaden's birth and tried to contact me. I never called her back. I just didn't care enough. Then my own marriage turned abusive, and I knew I had to get out. I filed for divorce and, needing support, moved back to my hometown. Jane found out and wanted to see me and Jaden. So, I invited her over. She showed up with Mom. When Mom saw me, she acted like everything was perfectly fine, as if years of silence and hurt hadn't happened. It felt incredibly weird, and I wanted to confront her right then. But Jaden was so happy to have new company, I decided to let it go. For the moment. Later, after Jaden was asleep, I confronted Mom about the no-contact period. Jane, bless her heart, immediately jumped in, apologizing on Mom's behalf. She said Mom's behavior was inappropriate, but this was an olive branch, a chance for me to reconnect with the only family I had left. I wasn't buying it. But then Mom started pleading for a chance to be a part of her grandson's life. Seeing how happy Jaden had been, I reluctantly decided to give it a shot. I told myself, maybe she's changed. For a few months, things were okay. I found a hybrid marketing job, and my company was amazing, letting me work from home since Jaden was still so young. Jane was at college an hour away, so she'd visit now and then. But the dynamic with Mom quickly soured. She'd come over almost every weekend, supposedly to help me with work or take care of Jaden. But instead, she'd take charge of my house as if I was living under her roof again. I let it slide a few times, thinking, this is just how she is. But her controlling nature escalated. It got out of hand. I knew I'd just end up fighting with her if I tried to talk to her myself, and I didn't want Jaden to witness that. So I asked Jane to intervene. Jane agreed, promising to talk to Mom that very day. I felt a tiny flicker of relief. What happened next was hell. The very next day, Mom called me. She launched into a full-blown tirade about how I should have talked to her directly, like an adult, instead of complaining to my sister. I tried to tell her it wasn't the right time, but she just kept going. So, I put her on speaker and went back to work. She must have realized I wasn't responding because she eventually hung up. That evening, Jane called. Mom was disappointed, Jane said. She had apparently cried about how I handled the call. I told Jane, very clearly, that I wasn't going to be pushed around like I was when we were kids. I told her I needed Mom to stay out of my life, and Jaden's, for a while. Jane tried to convince me not to limit Mom's time with Jaden, but eventually, she agreed. Later, I got a text from Mom, apologizing for misbehaving on the phone and promising to keep her distance. A year passed. Jane graduated college. Jaden turned 4, and I could finally trust him with reliable babysitters, a role Jane often filled. I saw Mom occasionally at family events or holidays, and things seemed fine. Then, one day, I had to rush into work urgently. I asked Jane to babysit, but she had a job interview. She suggested Mom could take care of him. I was instantly skeptical. No way. But after thinking it over, it really was the only viable option. Mom was more than happy to babysit. I gave her a detailed briefing on Jaden's allergies and what to do if anything went wrong. She cut me off, practically scoffing. "You can trust me with your child. I raised you, after all." Still, I handed her the cheat sheet to Jaden's needs and pleaded with her to call me immediately if anything happened. She nodded, and I left. My work emergency was, at most, a 2 to 3 hour job. Easy enough for someone who just bragged about her parenting skills, right? About an hour and a half later, my phone rang. It was an urgent call, telling me to get to the hospital ASAP. I apologized to my bosses, my heart hammering, and raced there. Jaden had had an allergic reaction. I was absolutely furious. I told Mom to wait outside while I went in to be with Jaden and speak with the doctors. They told me Jaden had eaten cookies with gluten, one of the 10 items he's severely allergic to. He was safe now, thankfully, but it could have gone very wrong. I promised the doctors this would never happen again. I took Jaden home, bringing Mom with me. Jane had already arrived, so I asked her to take Jaden to his room and stay with him. She did. What followed between Mom and me was a very dramatic fight. She tried to blame it on Jaden, saying he ate the cookie when she wasn't looking. But then, she quickly admitted it was her fault for not listening to me, for not checking the cheat sheet. I was done. I told her, point blank, that there was no way she could be around Jaden without my direct supervision anymore. She started to cry, claiming it was a mistake, that I was being too harsh. But I stood my ground. This wasn't about being harsh. This was about my child's life. She left soon after, and Jane followed her out. Later, Jane texted me, still accusing me of being too harsh. But when I told her she'd face the same consequences if she defended Mom, she quickly backed down. I hired a permanent, vetted babysitter, Nancy, and frankly, after that, I didn't need Jane for Jaden. Jane still visited, but her visits became less frequent. We drifted back to our old routine of rare texts, avoiding personal topics. I was okay with it. I understood the dynamic. A few months later, I was caught up in another work emergency on a Saturday, which also happened to be the day of Jaden's monthly doctor's appointment. Nancy was at the hospital with her own child, so I called Jane. She answered, but claimed she had a work commitment. Then she suggested Mom could babysit. I was about to refuse, to remind her of what happened last time. But before I could, Mom overheard Jane and, not realizing I was on the call, started ranting. She said she wouldn't babysit Jaden even if she was being paid, because dealing with him and his condition was a burden. Jane tried to stop her, but Mom just kept going, blaming me for not being a good mother and keeping the burden of dealing with Jaden to myself. I was so utterly done. I ended the call with Jane and immediately called Mom to give her a piece of my mind. She picked up, already apologizing, saying she was supposed to have brunch with Jane, and what I heard was just her being frustrated. I told her I wished her to stay away from me and the burden forever. She tried to patch things up, but I realized her apology wasn't sincere. It was just fear. Fear of losing her grandson. This time, Jane didn't defend her. She apologized, but I chose to ignore her texts. She had lied to me about work when she could have just told me the truth. I decided to take a rain check at work to accompany Jaden to his doctor's visit, and vowed right then not to initiate contact with my family again. The next year was hard. Jaden constantly asked about his grandma. As much as it pained me to see him miss her, I managed to divert his attention. His 5th birthday was approaching, and we'd chosen a school for him to start kindergarten. I sent out a few invites, including one for Jane, but not for my mother. Jane happily attended, bringing a huge bag of gifts. Honestly, they looked pretty expensive. I felt uncomfortable accepting something so costly, especially for a child who would probably move on to the next toy in 5 minutes. I asked her not to spend so much. Jane told me the gift wrap box inside the bag was hers, and the rest were from Mom. I didn't know how to react. I asked her to take them back. She refused, saying she didn't want to get between my feud with Mom, and suggested I at least consider Mom's gesture for her grandson. It's the least she can do after not being able to see him, she said. I understood where she was coming from. I started to feel guilty. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I was keeping Jaden from someone he genuinely enjoyed being with, over something only I considered serious. I decided to call Mom after the party to talk things out. After everyone had left, Jaden and I started opening gifts. Of course, he gravitated towards the big bag from his grandma. I looked inside, pulling out a plushie for his school bag. Then, as I reached in for more, my heart stopped. The rest of the bag was filled with multiple boxes of cookies from an expensive bakery. Cookies made with ingredients Jaden was severely allergic to. I was stunned. Upset doesn't even cover it. She was so focused on making a grand gesture that she didn't even bother to check if what she was sending was safe. I tried to hide them, telling Jaden the plushie was all that was in the bag, but he threw a tantrum. He eventually found the cookies, begging me to open a box. Things escalated quickly. Not knowing what else to do, I called Mom, asking her to tell Jaden the gift wasn't for him. Mom was clearly expecting a fight, probably anticipating an apology and thanks for her excellent gift. When I told her gift was dangerous and asked her to talk to Jaden, she flipped. She started giving me examples of how she raised me and Jane, then said if I wasn't such a weird hippie because I was vegan, which she considers an alternative lifestyle, and if I raised my son like a normal child, he wouldn't have these issues. I was taken aback by her audacity. My blood ran cold, but I didn't have time to argue. I just addressed the situation with Jaden. Now, after some complaining, she eventually told Jaden the cookies weren't for him and she'd bring his real gift tomorrow. He listened. I thanked her for calming him down and hung up before she could say another word. After that call, I fell into a rut, overthinking everything Mom had said, blaming me for Jaden's health, when she was clearly in the wrong. It triggered so much childhood trauma. I called Jane, hoping she'd understand, hoping she'd help me sort things out. Instead, she just told me to let it go because that's just how Mom is. In that moment, I knew I couldn't discuss my problems with Jane anymore. Our contact would remain superficial. I wasn't okay with what had happened. I wanted to teach Mom a lesson. The next day, when she showed up at my door with another gift for Jaden, I asked her to leave. I told her that since she wasn't happy with me and my lifestyle, so much so that she was willing to put her grandson's life in danger, she didn't deserve to be in our lives. She immediately launched into how she'd raised me through hardships, only for me to steal her grandson from her. But I held my ground. I don't want you around anymore. Then, in a transparent attempt to guilt-trip me, she asked about the gifts, how expensive they were. I didn't hesitate. I went inside, brought out the entire bag of presents, and wrote her a check right there for the gift Jaden had already opened. No strings attached, I told her. She said there was no need to be petty, but I was determined. She left, disappointed. Breaking the news to Jaden was hard. I told him Grandma would be gone for a while due to personal plans, which he thankfully accepted. Later, Jane called, hysterical. Mom was throwing a tantrum after returning from my house and had gotten sick because of it. Jane wanted me to apologize, to mend things. I told her, that's just how Mom is. She'll be fine soon enough. Jane called me unempathetic and hung up. I was fine with it. My relationship with Jane was definitely affected, and Jaden might never see his grandma again. A lot of you asked about my relationship with Jane, wondering if it was okay given she was the golden child. The thing is, I was always mature enough to understand it wasn't her fault, but my mother's, for favoring one child over the other. Jane has always been the easygoing one, trying to balance both me and Mom. She's never been problematic or rude, just non-confrontational, which is why she always told me to let it go. But I guess it's high time she understands that relationships can't be maintained by being a doormat, which she's facing now in the form of Mom's unwarranted tantrums. Now for the actual update. I'm writing this a week or so after that last incident. I hadn't heard from Jane about Mom, so I assumed things were quiet. But knowing my mother, I suspected something bigger was brewing. I decided to take a short vacation with Jaden, just until a few weeks had passed before his school started. Before we could leave, I got a call from my paternal aunt. I haven't mentioned my other relatives because they've mostly been irrelevant to my life. Most of them advocated for Mom's behavior when I was a child, or turned a blind eye, so I never bothered to maintain serious relationships with them. This call was unexpected. I figured something serious must have happened. When I picked up, she immediately gave me an earful about how Mom was admitted to the hospital, and how could I not even visit her. I asked her how she knew, and she told me Mom had called her and a few siblings, badmouthing me for abandoning her. I didn't want to explain. I just told her it was complicated and to stay out of it. She started calling me names, furious, but I hung up. I'm expecting a few more calls like that, but I hope blocking my aunt sends a clear message to the rest of them. Jaden and I left for our vacation the next day. I'm writing this second update after almost 2 weeks. Jaden and I had an amazing time on our vacation. Staying away from technology for a while really helped. When I finally checked my phone, I had a few missed calls from relatives, but I chose not to call back. Once we were home, I found some mails accusing me of being an inconsiderate daughter and a terrible mother, which just confirmed Mom was still playing the victim and spreading her false narrative. There was no way I was going to talk sense into her. I realized Jane was my only option. I had a few missed calls from her too, so I decided to call her back. She didn't answer. Assuming she was at work, I left her a voice note, asking her to keep an eye on Mom spreading rumors about me, and to consider this a warning about the consequences she'd face if this harassment from our relatives continued. She called me back that same night. She spoke as if nothing had happened between us, but I wasn't going to entertain that. I asked her to get straight to the point. She told me Mom was practically begging to talk to me. I initially refused, but after a lot of persuasion from Jane, I reluctantly agreed. Mom was overjoyed on the call, acting like everything was perfectly normal. I cut her off. "Why do you want to speak with me, Mom?" She told me that from the moment I asked her to stay away from Jaden, she had been suffering in silence. Funny, considering she badmouthed me to everyone. She said she was willing to accept any conditions if it meant she could be part of Jaden's life. She mentioned vaguely that she'd realized how attached she'd become to him over time, and it was also a way to reconnect with me. As much as I wanted to sympathize, I couldn't forget how she tried to endanger my son's life twice and then blamed me. So, ultimately, I said no. There wasn't much more to say. I ended the call and went back to my life. The following days were quiet, with fewer unwanted calls and no more desperate attempts for Mom to apologize. Jane hadn't reached out since, so things seemed to be going my way. Last weekend, I got an invite to a close childhood friend's wedding. I usually don't attend such events, busy with work and Jaden, but this time, my friend insisted. I hadn't considered Jane might be invited too, so it was a surprise to see her at the reception with her plus one, my mother. Jaden was thrilled to see his grandma, but Mom carefully controlled her excitement in my presence. I greeted Mom and Jane like a normal person. As I was about to head to my assigned table, Mom asked if we could talk. I told her I didn't want to cause a scene and thought it best not to converse, but then Jaden started throwing a fit to be with Grandma. He suggested we sit together so Mom could spend time with him, and I could ensure his safety. To avoid escalating Jaden's tantrum, I agreed. The night went surprisingly well. Mom acted civil. Jaden enjoyed his time with her, and Jane and I even caught up. Jane apologized for blaming everything on me, and we cleared the air. I didn't get to speak much with Mom as she was busy with Jaden, but that was fine. As the night ended and we headed to the parking lot, Mom stopped me. "Did the evening go poorly?" she asked. I told her it was fine. Then she asked if she could, based on these few hours, be part of our lives again. I looked her dead in the eye. "Mom," I said, "I allowed you to be around Jaden tonight because it was the only practical option to avoid a scene. But you endangered his life before. Twice. And you've never truly taken responsibility for it." My voice was firm, resolute. "There's no way I'd let you near him again, even if it makes me the villain in my son's eyes." She started crying right there. Jane immediately tried to calm her down, guiding her back to the car. I knew it was best to leave quickly, so I rushed to my car with Jaden, who was also upset seeing his grandma like that. Mom tried to coax Jaden into going with her, but he was too scared and clung to me. Her crying turned into wailing, and I drove away as people started gathering to see what was wrong. I called Jane after putting Jaden to bed. She spoke in hushed tones, asking me to call later. So I did. The next day was Sunday. Once I'd fed Jaden and finished my chores, I sat him down and explained that he wouldn't be seeing his grandma anymore and that he should avoid interacting with anyone outside at school without my permission, especially Jane or Grandma. I think he understood, given the previous night's incident. Soon after, Jane called. She said she couldn't talk last night because Mom became hysterical at the mention of my name. I told her it was fine and asked if everything was okay. She mentioned that things were fine for now, but she feared Mom's behavior might indicate a bigger issue. I agreed, sharing my concerns about Mom potentially bothering us again. Jane understood my perspective and even suggested a restraining order if Mom didn't improve. I've also considered moving, just in case Mom recovers and tries something like this again. I'm writing this final update after a month, because fortunately, this issue has finally been resolved. In our last conversation, Jane had expressed concern about Mom's behavior, so she wisely got Mom checked out. The diagnosis came back: severe bipolar disorder. A psychiatrist recommended admitting her to a private mental health institution for a while, due to her age and for better, specialized care. Jane agreed and discussed it with Mom, who, surprisingly, understood and accepted the doctor's advice. The institution is in another state, so Mom and Jane will be leaving next week. I knew Jane didn't have the money for this, so I offered to help financially, but she said Mom was covering the cost. I backed off. Jane also passed on a message from Mom to Jaden, saying she would get well soon and see him when his mother allowed it. It's a strange ending. Not exactly a happy one, but certainly a resolution. It's like a missing piece clicked into place, explaining so much of the chaos she'd brought into our lives. There's relief, but also a profound sadness. So, tell me, have you ever had to draw such a hard line with family to protect your peace, or more importantly, your children? What would you have done in my place? I really want to hear your thoughts.